Chairman Moolenaar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again, and it was a privilege to work together with you on issues related to China when you were in the Senate, and I'm excited to do so again in your new capacity, especially as you undertake this much-needed reorganization of the department. And following up on your earlier testimony and statement, you rightly identified China and the Chinese Communist Party as a principal threat to the United States, and for decades, as part of its strategy of civil-military fusion, the CCP has stolen intellectual property to stand up its state-owned enterprises and build up its military. It's constantly working to evade export controls to get cutting-edge and legacy chips to leapfrog the U.S. in the AI race and to supply its missile systems. We cannot give the CCP the means to displace the United States. Recently, the Department of Commerce rescinded the overly complex AI diffusion rule, which it intended to cement our lead in AI technology by limiting U.S. chip sales, particularly to countries that may allow Chinese entities access. As Secretary of State, you have a vital role in protecting dual-use technologies from being used by America's adversaries. I wanted to ask you, how do you see the replacement to the diffusion rule taking shape, and what guardrails do you think are needed to prevent China from siphoning more U.S. innovation to build up its military?
Well, as you know, the Commerce Department is undertaking a review of the previous administration's decisions with regards to specific countries and also specific technologies. And so we're providing guidance for them on that regard, or we're providing input. Ultimately, they're the ones that will have to do that. We've heard from a lot of partner nations, some who feel they were unfairly treated in that decision, others who feel we're happy with the outcome. So I know some of those decisions are ongoing, but it's the highest priority. The fact that we have to assume that basically every country or any company that operates in communist China is under the control of the CCP. They can be an independent company. They can argue that they're a corporate entity that's not related to the government. But the truth of the matter is that based on their national security law in China, every company has to do whatever the government tells them to do and turn over any technologies they tell them to turn over. In addition to that, because of the civil-military fusion that exists, virtually any company in China is basically part of their defense industrial complex. They are. And we've seen that repeatedly over and over again. And we've seen advances that the Chinese have made in their own defensive capabilities and offensive capabilities militarily as a result of technology transfers. So it is among the highest of priorities for this administration to protect against that. And frankly, it's also an issue that I raise with every one of my engagement with our partners. It was a big topic of conversation at the recent foreign ministers gathering of NATO last week in Turkey. So a growing number of our allies are also interested in similar moves on their front.
Well, thank you very much for raising that issue, because as you know, the acquiring U.S. technology through third parties is something China is actively trying to do. There are also national security concerns with Chinese nationals coming to the United States to study at our colleges and universities, since the CCP has previously threatened some students' families if they don't spy for them. And there have been instances, including in my home state of Michigan, where Chinese nationals studying in the U.S. engaged in trespassing on a military base. What can the State Department do to protect our college campuses and improve the vetting of Chinese nationals who come to the U.S. to study?
I mean, it's not a difficult issue. I mean, it's difficult in the sense that where I think we as a people are generally uncomfortable with saying an entire group of people from one country cannot come. On the other hand, it's hard for us to ignore the repeated and large number of industrial, commercial, and educational research and intellectual property theft being tracked back to primarily graduate students from China. Now, on the one end, you can sort of vet it at the front end, and there are some that have had links prior to their studies in this country to the intelligence services or military services. Those are easy to take out. But the others are more complicated, and that is someone who could be threatened because their family's back home. And in many cases, some of these students do not consider what they're doing to be espionage. They consider it totally sort of acceptable that if you come across a secret or something that's valuable, you would bring it back home to your country. So it's a huge challenge, and it's one that we take very seriously, and it's one that's under consideration now. In fact, there's an interagency conversation happening on different proposals to address it, but it's one I've been raising for years, especially with our institutes of higher education in our country.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.